Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Randy Barnett from Georgetown Law School. I'm here to introduce the Repeal Amendment. The Repeal Amendment is an amendment that is actually very, very simple. It gives 2/3 of the state legislatures the power to repeal any federal law or regulation. And the wording of the amendment is there on the screen for you to see. It's completely transparent. What it does is quite obvious. Why it does it? Well, it's also pretty obvious. They're going to make 3 points today before we introduce the distinguished speakers that are behind us. And the 3 points I want to make are the original Constitution contained a check on congressional power by the states. And that was a check provided by the fact that that senators of the United States were selected by state legislatures. The original Constitution contained almost no checks on state power on the part of the federal government. And that was changed. The no check on state power was changed by the 14th Amendment, which gave the federal government, Congress in particular, and the courts a check on state power when states were abusing the rights of their citizens. But then the 17th Amendment, in the 20th century, took away the check that states had on federal power by providing for the direct election of senators by the people of the states. The Repeal Amendment addresses this change by providing an additional check on federal power and putting that check in the hands of the elected representatives of 2/3 of every state, thereby restoring the original balance between state and federal power that was contained in the original Constitution. The second thing that the Repeal Amendment does is it removes one of the barriers to repealing laws that currently exist. The framers of the Constitution deliberately made it difficult to pass laws. They created a bicameral legislature so that you had to pass both houses. They created a presidential veto so you had to get past the president. And then there was judicial review. So it was difficult to enact laws. But one of the consequences of that is that it's also difficult to repeal laws, because to repeal a law is essentially to pass another one, and a repeal can be blocked by a filibuster in the Senate. It can be blocked by a presidential veto, even when it's overwhelmingly popular. The Repeal Amendment provides an alternative way of repealing laws that can get around the various veto gates that already exist in the federal government, meaning even when a repeal of a law has the support of a majority in Congress, it gets around a Senate filibuster. When it has the support of a majority in Congress, it gets around a presidential veto. And in that way, it makes repealing laws a bit easier than it does enacting them. And the final thing the final factor that I'm going to talk about that the Repeal Amendment addresses is the amazing growth of federal power that has taken place in the last 50 or 60 years. This was unimaginable to the founders, but what it has done is by giving the federal government essentially control over most academic activity that takes place in the country, that gives it control over the states, who are themselves as institutions engaging in economic activity, unless there's some protection for the states themselves. And the Supreme Court has provided some limited protection for the states themselves, but what is really necessary is a structural check that does not rely on the courts to protect the operations of state governments or the ability of state governments to operate on and to act on behalf of the liberties of their own constituents. So those are 3 things that the Repeal Amendment does do that are necessary to do and can really only be done by a constitutional amendment.